Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host, welcoming you to another awesome edition of podcasting here. And as you can see this week, I am joined by Dr. Pat Hendrickson, and she is an educator and has taught and has done a lot of different things, but I'm going to let her introduce herself because she's got, Pat, how would you, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back again.
Yeah.
I'm very much like you, Chris. I'm a lifelong learner. Okay.
There we go.
I'm a lifelong learner. I'm actually in another degree program myself, but, I teach university students in a number of different programs. Some are freshman programs or college success seminars. And that's how I really came to know you in reaching out and discussing with you how happy I was that you went back to earn your degree, and how I wanted you to be successful. And I was here to help if you needed me. You didn't, but I was here to help if you did. And I also teach business courses. I have a business degree, and I teach organizational behavior and knowledge management, as well as nonprofit courses, that sort of thing. So I teach a lot of different courses as an adjunct for a couple of different universities. And I also am involved in ongoing research in I guess my research methodology is grounded theory.
And what is that?
What is that? I'm going to put it really simply.
Yeah.
It's rather than going into a research problem, if you will, right? Going into the field about research and saying, okay, well, I'm going to prove or disprove this hypothesis, this idea. I'm going to prove that all blue-eyed people like bananas. Well, you don't go into the field proving or disproving anything. You go into the field, and it's mainly about, in my area of research, social science, group behaviors. And you look at what's going on. You ask what they call a grand tour question. In my initial dissertation, the question that I asked was about virtual worlds and online environments. And I asked, tell me about your experience in virtual environments. And it's an open-ended question, and the respondents share with you what they feel their experience was. And then you code the data and you look for commonalities within that information, and then you categorize it. So then you find out by looking at all that data and comparing the data of each participant to the other, you find out what the main concern is of all of the people involved in that particular group behavior.
Got it. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for sharing all of that.
Sure, you're welcome.
And having done some, deep dive research of that nature myself for my paper, I get, how involved and actually in a way how fun it can be too. It's not just this drudgery of, of big words and pedantry. It's also fun figuring things out like that, because one of the fun things about research is when you learn things you didn't know before.
Oh, yeah.
And you go in with certain ideas and you look at all this data, you collect this information, and then the data tells you something that's new that you go, oh, wait a minute. I didn't see that. I didn't expect that. That wasn't, what about that? And that's always
exactly what happened to me.
Yeah.
And we're probably going to get off, if I go down this path, we may go off track a little bit. But in my research, I had been involved in career education and people transitioning from the world of work. And I thought that when I went into these online games and environments, that I was really going to be looking at economies, online economies, and
Mm-hmm.
skill sets of people, and what were transferable skills that people had that they could take and transfer, into a real world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, or if there was any, commonalities in them. Well, in my research, that was not what was the common thread among people that I interviewed. What was common among people was they weren't sure who they were really talking to. And this was before we had video like we do now.
Mm.
They weren't sure who they were really talking to behind that computer screen. And we still have a lot of that now. You hear the term catfishing and whatnot.
Oh, sure.
But so my dissertation became test driving gender in virtual worlds, and people using different genders to play different characters and represent themselves. And there are, 5 paths to that theory. But it was mainly about, why are you being a girl in an online environment when you're really a guy? And or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of reasons for that. Some are very practical, and well, I guess they're all practical to some degree, really. So
How
to
interesting.
get back to your point,
Yeah.
I had no idea that's where my research was going to take me.
There you go. Exactly.
So it's very, it can be really interesting. You learn a lot of things about yourself, as I know you did in your program.
Yeah.
Learn a lot about your subject matter, but also about yourself. And like I had some preconceived notions. I thought I was going to be studying, skills and economies, and it's not what that turned out to be at all.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
One almost wonders, not that I'm like some old hat at this now, but one almost wonders, if you're not learning something about yourself in the process, if you're not learning more about other people in the process, I would really question the value of either the research method or the time that you're investing in it or how you're going about it, because that's kind of the point of research, is to learn things. But I think on a personal level, there's just a deep, there's a possibility at least of very deep insights into yourself, and your own story, so to speak. When you're especially doing social science research, especially, I think more so than say quantum physics or something like that,
Right. Yeah, I would agree, especially since I'm not very good at that.
Right. Me too.
Exactly.
Physics. Exactly. Who knows? Maybe a quantum physicist might go, oh, no, I know all about myself now.
Well, that's true. Let's hear from some, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, getting around to what we're talking about today, we've gathered again here for sort of a part 2, and it's been over a year since we talked, which is shocking to me. I could not believe I had let that much time pass. But this was the idea of us talking, was to help people who, specifically this is targeted to people who have come out of coercive control situations like, that my channel tends to focus on. But really it applies to anybody. If you're hitting the reset button halfway through life, this isn't going to apply to you. If you're fresh on to, your educational route as a young person in life, this is really going to apply to you too. I mean, it's really, education is one of those things that you have to be a pretty, you'd have to be pretty dead inside for education to not matter to you, or for it not to be able to have some positive effect on your life, I think. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so big on education, is because of the power inherent in learning new things, whether it's a skill that you're applying in the real world, whether it's knowledge or information or facts, even trivia and factoids. I mean, they have their place. All of this contributes to making us who we are. And it's a way of contributing to ourselves, our identity, our life, where after you're out of the mandatory education band, the choices are yours. They're 100% yours, or they should be. And you get a voice in shaping the direction and course of your life by setting up and putting yourself through the grist mill of education. And it's not easy. And sometimes it's the opposite of fun. Sometimes it's great fun. Sometimes it's amazing how fun it is. Other times, not so much. But there's always the other side and the accomplishment of the other side. And there really are, I really just don't even have words. And I got a lot of words, but I don't have the words to describe the euphoric feeling that I certainly experienced many times during my higher education process. And so this show, we're going to talk about, last time we talked about, just education in general, getting your groove in, figuring out the resources. What do you do? Where do you start? This time we're going to go, okay, now we're going to take it to the next level and look at higher education and the possibilities and potentials of that. So that all being said, did you, Pat, want to say anything to start with on that?
Yeah, when I wrote you a little email to congratulate you, and then we talked about reconnecting in a podcast. I really felt that people needed to hear your story, Chris.
Okay.
And how you, and I know this is your show, so I don't want to take over interviewing you.
Well, we'll have a conversation. It's all good.
But I think it's very helpful to hear someone else's story. I have my own story. I went back to earn my education as an adult, and I had a lot of insecurities, and some of those were based on things people said to me. So some of them was my own baggage from many trips before. So I thought, Chris, what were some of your considerations when you decide? How did you come about finally deciding, and what were some of those considerations to earn your degree?
Yeah, great question, and very relevant to what we're talking about today. I waited a long time. I had a desire years ago to pursue higher education, to go after maybe a 4-year degree, get a bachelor's in something like psych or psych or something like that. And then I was confronted by the financial side of that. And it, frankly, right then and there, it stopped me in my tracks. I mean, it was not a lack of desire to learn. And I had spent and have spent many years since leaving Scientology learning about the psychology of cults and coercive control and what that's all about, and the sociology of it, and even digging into the brain and the neuroscience of it, with the little tiny smidgen of knowledge that we have on that front. It's still such a developing field. So I tried to approach it from a lot of different ways to try to understand and answer my questions along the way. Well, why? You get one answer and then it gives you 10 more questions. And oh my God, right? And what about this? What about that? So I thought higher education might be the route to deal with that and really kind of nail it down. And also it would help. This was kind of big for me. I don't know how much this is for other people, but with the amount of learning I was doing and study and research and interviews and YouTube videos and stuff like that, I felt like I always felt like I was on shaky ground with my knowledge because it was self-done, self-taught, and sort of self-determined as to which videos, what books, what papers, where was I going, and having limited access to the literature, in other words, the actual formal academic body of knowledge that's out there. Most of that stuff is behind paywalls. It's very hard to get to, and there's ways around that, and I've learned, but at the time I didn't know anything about it. Academia was this fortress of, this sort of crystalline fortress in the distance that I, sort of saw glinting on the horizon, but I could never really aspire to go there or be part of that world. And so I was always considered myself a bit of an outsider. So those were the things that were sort of barriering or stopping me from going forward. And really, it really did come down to the money. I'll tell you one thing: if I've said this before, I'll say it again. If L. Ron Hubbard was right, and I believe that he was, when he was quoted as saying that the way to make easy money or the way to make a buck is to start a religion. Well, I'll tell you, criticizing a religion or denouncing destructive cults is the way to not make money. There is not the big money in that. So I didn't really see an outlet or an avenue for me to pursue that. And rather than get caught up in the loss of that or the quote unquote tragedy of that, I just went, well, I guess it's not for me.
Yeah.
I guess it's not going to happen. And finally, what changed all of that, and it changed it really quickly. It was totally unpredicted for, unseen, and I was very happy. It was really an accident of circumstances. Two things happened. First thing is the program that I ended up doing, the Psychology of Coercive Control program, which is a master's level program offered through the University of Salford, was created. It hasn't existed for decades. It's a very new program, and it was created by Rod and Linda Dubrow Marshall, and they're wonderful people who have been in the anti-cult fight for decades. They're trained psychologists. They're great people, and they both have their own cult background and all that. So they started this education program and this master's program, and they started it as an in-person program in Salford, which is over in the UK. And I learned about this in 2018. I went to and spoke at an International Cultic Studies Association conference, the ICSA conference in Philadelphia, and I met Rod there. And I'd never met him before, didn't know anything about him really at that point, except he was a name of many of people who were involved in the ICSA world. And in meeting him, he talked about this program. And I was like, wow, I would love to do that. That's amazing. And then he just hinted at the possibility that you wouldn't necessarily have to have the 4-year degree in order to do the program. And I was like, what? What?
Highly unusual.
Very, right? I didn't even know that was a possibility, period, much less, for the field I'm so interested in. And I had to bookmark it, though, because it was an in-person only program. And so it was only offered at physically. You had to go to Salford. Well, again, money and time and my channel and the fact that, as we were saying before the show, it's sort of... it's like Dune, the content must flow, right? I have to keep it going. And so I couldn't see taking a year off and putting my channel on hold and my life on hold. I mean, I could see it, but only if I had a really good paying gig at the end, right? That wasn't the case. And so I didn't really see, in other words, I didn't see the justification, the balance of, my life and the factors of my life versus higher education wasn't panning out. And again, I shrugged and went, well, damn, maybe someday, who knows, and that was that. The second thing that happened that opened the door to all of this now and to the life I have now is COVID.
Yeah.
COVID hit. And when COVID hit in 2020, it hit hard, as we all know. We all lived through it. It was awful. The one thing that I can point to in COVID and that entire time period that was an actual huge benefit was the program went online.
Yeah.
Because a lot of university programs went online.
That's right. And the reason for that is many, but mainly it changed their business model. Right. They didn't have, customers, if you will, coming through the doors.
That's right.
And there, we talked earlier that a lot of my background is in grants writing and funding. And typically, if there's a really big problem, the government will throw a lot of money at it. And a lot of the universities got COVID funding or applied for COVID funding, and they chose to use that funding in different ways. And some of that funding was used to underwrite college courses for students or to change the tuition structure a bit. And that made it, I guess I'd say that made it really available and attractive to a lot of students. Yeah. Now, something else that you had going for you, Chris, that this is my business background coming in terms of your I'll just say service provider. I know educators really cringe when I say that, but we are providing services to people.
Yep.
And, they should be at a good level of service. But in terms of providing that service, if you have a new program, like the individuals you referred to were launching a new program, they want it to be successful, and they're looking for candidates, good qualified candidates like yourself, that have a successful track record of doing what you do and bringing your base of knowledge to them.
Yeah.
So if you have an opportunity, if anyone has an opportunity to enter a new program, I would say that it's almost always preordained for success.
Great.
If they can get enough students in, and usually there are not, hundreds of students flocking to a new program.
That's right.
But you will get a little bit more individualized attention if you can come in under one of these types of umbrellas. And I don't care if it's a welding program at a trade school and they've never had welding before, but a local business is kind of underwriting the equipment, or if it's, basket weaving or whatever it is. I really encourage people to consider that, because it's challenging when you have new programs because it's new and people are not always aware of the issues that they might encounter or the circumstances. And by that, I mean the teachers and the educators and even the administration itself. They may not be aware of some of those dilemmas they'll encounter. So there are growing pains associated with new programs, and you may get a lot, well, we never had that happen before, or we don't know the answer to that. So there may be some waiting and delay, but I can tell you they really want you to be successful, and they're not going to put a lot of roadblocks up in your way. And that's how I earned my master's in education. They had a new program, and I was working in the field of education really without a degree, but I had a talent for getting grants, and I was underwriting courses for teachers. And I thought, boy, maybe I could pick up one or two of these courses myself and use them as electives towards my bachelor degree that I was in the process of earning. So I did that, and then I became acquainted with people at the different colleges, and I learned about their new programs. So there was a program where, very much like you, I kind of got in under the wire because it was new and they wanted students.
Yeah. And
I was supposed to have to take the GRE. That's a test you take, your general, I guess, requirements equivalency. I don't remember what the exact name is. And the MAT, the Miller's Analogy test. And I said, well, I took the teacher's test. Would you accept that? Because I didn't want to pay for the Miller or the GRE. So they said, well, okay, we'll take that. So, I think that if you're really motivated, like you were, to get in and get something, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask questions and see if they'll take you under certain conditions.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's the only way I got in, was actually doing, I'm literally living proof right here of everything you just said, because that's exactly how I got into this program. Is I went from can't be done for this reason, for that reason, for the other reason, to wait a minute, maybe this actually can happen. And once I learned it was online, I started emailing with Rod, the program leader or director or creator. And it was new. It was fresh. I was like, only 2 or 3 years old at this point. By the time COVID was rolling around, I think they had only done a couple of years of this. And they offered a full-time and a part-time version of the program, and so but full-time, it's a year program through the as a master's program. And so once it was offered as an online program, suddenly the idea of being able to do it from my home was incredibly practical, and I could continue to keep my channel going. In other words, keep my job while doing this work. And I, maybe in hindsight, I might reconsider the full-time versus part-time versioning of that, because I was doing 2 classes every, and in the UK system, it's divided into trimesters. So it was, third of the year, and then third of the year. And so for the first third, it was 2 classes. Second third, it was 2 classes. And then the third term was the research paper, the research work. So 2 classes were rough. That was a lot of work. And even without the UK system, again, is different because there was not constant testing. There were no pop quizzes or midterms or anything like that. It was all the work, all the grading relied on the papers that you wrote or the presentations that you did. And it was kind of an all or nothing kind of thing with that. And but the point you made there, that is, I think, the most important point, is not the logistics of the program. It was the willingness of the staff and the university to really help, because they want the programs to succeed. And they want you to succeed in the programs. And this is at this level. I'm not talking about if you go, I think it's probably a little bit of a different situation when you're talking about your freshman, sophomore, regular 101, 201 type classes, where they're just piling bodies in, and you have to go through the process in order to get up to where you want to get to. Well, like I said, I got to skip that line. And that's part of that help, is getting to skip the line. There's a legit program to do that. It's not just some off-the-cuff thing that these program directors created. It was a formal part of the university that if you had professional level experience or some other educational experience that legitimately put you in a position where you really did know this stuff, and you didn't have to go do the 4-year degree just for the sake of doing it, you had an open ticket into this program. And the tremendous amount of work I've done on my channel and writing a book and all the work I've done, it all paid off. That was it. That was the professional expertise they were looking for, and I was able to present that and sailed right through, and I was accepted in.
They've changed education a lot over the years, and they have what they call portfolios, and that's similar to what you described. People are allowed to enter a program bringing with them their life experience, and you have this wealth of you've got over 350 some odd podcasts, right?
That's right.
Nate, what number is this one, right?
Yeah, we're probably up to like 360 or something right now. Yeah.
So, you have a body of work. You've interviewed so many experts in a wide variety of fields. Now, not everybody's going to have that and be able to bring that to the table, but I think that it's really important for people who have been indoctrinated through a cult or some sort of church education, or even in an abusive relationship, to not diminish what they've done in the past and think they're coming to the table with nothing, because everybody has what are called transferable skills. And I would like to talk to you about some of those, but I think that there is very much this construct that you described, such as pop quizzes and testing, and oh gosh, I hate that myself, Chris, and I don't like to do that to students. And I don't like it done to me as a student. And so I think if someone is considering entering a higher education program, they might want to ask to see a syllabus or two, or for, if they're speaking with an advisor and going through these channels, or speak to some students, because if you're not a testing person and you're afraid to get into a program like Chris described, where you're getting pop quizzes and that sort of thing, I'm not going to want to enter that.
Right.
But if I'm able to be in coursework where I'm having, discussions and maybe, writing papers, considering ideas, and I can tell you my students don't actually like writing papers. Not many of them say, "Oh boy, sign me up for writing papers."
Right.
But a lot of universities have projects, and depending upon the way they deliver information, one of the universities that I work with, they have projects, and you work towards building your project by creating different component elements. And then you get the opportunity to revise them before you present your final project. So I think that something people want to consider is what we would call instructional methodology, the way that they teach, the way that the courses are, delivered.
Right.
So I wouldn't want to put anybody off by thinking that they're going to have to do tests all the time or be afraid of a pop quiz, because I have test anxiety myself every time. And I still have to take tests, even though I have my doctorate. For my postdoc fellowship, I had to take some tests and research. And boy, I was nervous about that myself. So I just think that you got to find the right program for you, and you did. And they're out there. I think people just need to take a little more time and look at what they're looking for. Be selective.
Exactly. Very much so. You do have the time as an adult to check this stuff out. I didn't actually do as much of that research as I could have before diving into it. It was really the program was of such intense interest to me, and I just went, well, let's go, right? And one of the things I think, maybe you could respond to this, I'm not sure. I found the attitude, and maybe it was the UK versus US, I'm not sure. I really cannot speak right now to master's or doctorate, in the US versus in the UK, because I've only experienced UK. And in the United Kingdom, they are very much a sink or swim kind of situation when you are in that. You're at a master's level now. They're not coddling you.
That's a difference right there, sure.
Right? They're not, it's not, and so they kind of, though, the way I interpreted the experience was not one of through a harsh lens. I did have a couple issues with the syllabus and the way that the program was laid out, and I took those up with the professor at the time because I thought the introduction to it, could have been a little smoother. There was a certain sink or swim with the research methods class specifically, and the fact that they started you with statistics and some things that were very hard for me to get my wits around to start with. And I came to learn, though, because I was blaming myself for not having the 4-year degree and jumping in, and the sink or swim attitude of it was, well, here's the data and it's your job to assimilate it. It was a great relief when I found out all my reasons were wrong as to why I was having trouble with it, because all the people who had come in fresh off a 4-year program or who had done one in the past were having the exact same problems I was. It was no different. And I was like, oh, really? And they were like, yeah, this just isn't necessarily being spoon-fed to us. You really got to dig in, right? And I was like, oh, okay, all right, cool. And we all figured it out. And I don't know anybody who didn't make it through the program, by the way. And there was not failures in this. There was an intense amount of assistance I and others received from our professors and advisors while we were doing it. And the university had tons of resources on their website for how to write papers, how to do the citations, it's all there for you. Nobody's trying to make it.
It is.
Nobody's wanting you to fail. Nobody wants you to not make it, but you do have to work at it. And if you're not willing to do the work, well, they're not going to spoon feed you either. So it's at the master's level, you got to bring it. So it's kind of a little bit of both, you know. I think in terms of what you're going to expect to have happen to you, it's going to be work, but it's not impossible work.
That's right, Chris.
Yeah.
And, you have a quality about you that many people have. They don't realize it. They're what are called self-directed learners, and that's really what it takes to have a college education.
Yeah.
Because to have a degree in higher ed, or just even to take a few courses in higher education, like you said, it's not going to be spoon-fed to you. It's about what it is that you want to acquire through the course.
That's right. That's right.
What do you want? A lot of times my students will say, well, I'm having trouble in your course. And it always makes me a little bit sad, because no, it's not my course, it's your course.
Right. That's right.
So let's talk about it. What is the trouble? What do we need to do? Where's the trouble? And so I think usually what happens is a student does not realize that there are resources and supports and ways to be successful. They're just not looking in the right place, or they're afraid to ask. And that was my problem as an adult learner. And I can even remember, and it pains me to this day to know this about myself, that, I had a test. I had a test, and I said to the instructor, and I was going to a program that was in an evening program. After I had completed my work all day, I drove an hour and a half to take a 4-hour course. And I said to the instructor, gee, you graded this answer is wrong. It's marked wrong, but I can show you on page 259 where it says this exact same thing. And the instructor said to me, well, if I graded it, that's what you're getting.
Oh, come on. Wow.
I really didn't know how to respond, and I just sucked it up, and I said, okay, I don't, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to ask. I was really afraid, because I was kind of insecure about being there in the first place. Do I really belong here? Can I do this? Or, geez, how do I navigate this dilemma? I thought this person would say, oh, I made a mistake. Okay, well, here, I'm sorry about that. And, fix it. But that's not what happened. And I didn't know enough to bring it to someone else who was, higher on the food chain than that individual, who was just doing a part-time job and didn't know. They probably didn't know the process of changing a grade. So instead, they just, pushed it back on me, and maybe they were going to give me a pass on something else. I don't know. But I think, being afraid or reluctant to ask for help, I think that is one of the biggest issues my students have, aside from the money issue.
That's a good point.
Asking for help.
Yeah. That's a really, really important point. And I can't speak to, the broad body of people who go get education, but my own experience and what I've always encouraged other people who are encountering trouble or problems in the program I did was, is communicate. Open your mouth. Say something, right? Let people know. Professors aren't psychics. How are they supposed to know you're having problems in their program if you don't tell them? How will they know that there's a problem in the program itself if they don't get the feedback from the students telling them there's a problem in the program? It's not always on you. And hearing that actually openly acknowledged by my professor during the program, he was like, oh yeah, this research methods thing. He definitely commiserated with me on that. And we don't have to get into all the details of it, because I'm sure he doesn't want me to, but it was, there's ups and downs in any program. It's put together by people, and people are flawed.
That's right. And it's put together by a committee usually.
Even worse. So,
right.
Seriously, right? So you sometimes need that individual advisor attention, and that's what they're there for. And in a smaller program, especially when you're at a higher level, you have those minutes or even hours with your advisor or your professor where they can really help you out, or the TA, whoever it is who's going to help you. Reach for that help. Do not ever be bashful. It's not just a matter of you're a paying customer. It really comes back to what we were saying at the beginning is that these people want these programs to succeed. They want you to pass that. And in fact, if you drop out, that threatens the viability of the program for the people who put it together, because if they have too many people dropping out, the university goes, well, this isn't succeeding.
Well,
right?
That's part of it, Chris. But the government, right, looks at everything, and the universities and the colleges and the trade schools and anybody who accepts student loans, any organization that is accepting student loans, has to really monitor their enrollment and retention. So you get in, so many people enroll, how many of those are being retained, and how many of those are, defaulting on the student loan, or, dropping out after 2 weeks because they didn't realize how much time it was going to take, or their job is interfering, or, whatever. So there's always a very hard look at enrollment and retention. And in the classes that I teach, I'm very mindful, because for a very long time I carried student loan debt, and I don't like to see anybody carry any student loan debt, especially if they're paying for a course they failed in. I don't want anybody to pay for failure. That breaks my heart.
Right.
So usually your instructors care if you passed or failed, because that also reflects upon them. Now, I'm not going to say that it's, their responsibility to see that you pass.
Right.
But, there is some responsibility for maintaining a connection with students and, doing what you can to help, motivate them a little, or direct them to the resources that they need. And so I think that people have to think about, can they be self-directed? Can I ask for help? Can I ask for help when I need it? Can I do these things on my own and feel comfortable about doing it on my own?
Yeah.
And I say yes. If you can go to the store, if you can log in, you can pretty much get an education.
I would definitely agree with that. And I'll add another layer to this of support that you have, at least that I certainly experienced. And I don't think this was some rarity. I hope it wasn't. Is that, at the higher level, at the master's and above levels, you are going to have your cohort, your other students, the people who are studying with you. And in my case, for the United States online program, there was a very small number of us. There was about 15, 20 of us. And we were lectured, and we had a weekly, with the lectures we saw, but we just generally didn't see them live because of the time difference. But what we would get was a live Q&A or discussion or consultancy with, as a group, with the professors each week. And so we could answer they could answer questions about the lectures or the presentations, help us out with, things that had come up along the program, or the papers we had to write, and focusing on how to go about doing that. What's this? What's that? What do we expect from you? Here are the requirements. We had to do an oral presentation at one point. Okay, it's got to be this, and the PowerPoint, and here's how you do that. So all those kind of fundamental logistical type, nuts and bolts type questions. And every week we got to meet with them. And then we had, if you needed, you could have a separate advisory with them. But the support structure that created, even online, I ended up becoming like social media friends with some of these folks, right?
Absolutely.
And we could interact and share. This is where I learned. It was through the back channels, through the sort of social media connections, that I learned everybody else was having the same hard time I was having with the statistics stuff.
Sure.
And it wasn't just me, or
No.
people were so worried about those papers because the whole grade relied on it. And it was like, oh my God, I'm stressing out. I'm losing my shit, right? All this. And people were really freaking out more than I was. And I was like, damn, because I didn't think that was possible. I mean, I had, I got to be... let's talk turkey about this for a second, because the pressure can be intense, and it's self-generated way more in my case.
It is. Oh my goodness. It really is. And some of my students, I can't express how much pressure they put on themselves. I'm not doing it to them, I promise you.
Right. Right.
But they have so many competing priorities, and many have families, and they have jobs, and they have bills to pay, and they may have taken out a student loan or taken on a part-time job to pay for school, and now the time that they had allocated for school is gone because they're taking this part-time job on to pay for school.
Right.
So all those competing priorities, the desire for the student to be successful, and then so many students are not doing it just for them. They're doing it for their children or their family. They're the first one to earn an education, and they feel the weight of the world on their shoulders.
Yes. Yes.
So a lot of that pressure is self-imposed, or people think they have to be perfect, that they have to get an A.
Yes.
And
I thought my papers needed to be publication quality, or they weren't going to be any good.
I know that about you as a student. From hearing you talk, I know that about you, right?
And that was ridiculous. I was doing that to myself. And you notice something along the line here is we're like 45 minutes or so into this talk so far, and not once have we brought up any cult specific stuff or baggage connected with any of this. Everything we've been talking about is what everybody experiences when they go through this stuff. And we could add that layer, but I really actually, having done it now, that was an excuse that some of us used during the time, is that we thought we were having a hard time because of our cult background, or the abuse in the background, or the trauma from the background. And I am not saying that's never a factor, but I am going to say that if you jump to that right away as the problem, you might not really be accurate in that. I was wrong about that in my own self-assessment, and I watched others make the same mistake, because talking with you and others and getting through the program made me realize it's just kind of its own thing. And that pressure that we bring on ourselves is not just because we were in a cult before. It's just what people kind of do to themselves in these situations. And you have to kind of learn through the process how unnecessary that is.
I recently had two kind of interesting situations recently. Well, actually several that now that you're speaking about this, everybody comes and they bring their own little special load of suitcases with them in terms of their baggage.
Yep.
And usually online, people there's an introductory conversation. People introduce themselves. And sometimes my students will introduce themselves as being, a former drug addict or recovering alcoholic, or, a single mother, or, whatever it is. Someone recently was, a cult member. Somebody else said that they are a newly transgendered individual. And all of these different aspects that they feel are really going to be a barrier for them are not. They actually, I have found, enhance their experience in some way.
That's a great point. That's a really good point, and it's how we're, I believe, here in this talk here, how we're trying to frame this is it's a net positive, not a net negative, and I think that's an important way to approach it. It's not necessarily that your background isn't a factor or that it's not going to rear its ugly head during the process of education. I'd be amazed if it didn't at some point, especially with the kind of trauma that is carried around from a coercive control situation. You can absolutely find parallels to it in higher education, the pressure and the demands and even some of the, thought reform techniques and stuff. I mean, yeah, that happens. That crops up from time to time. But really, I believe it would be a more correct and positive way of thinking about it, that you survived that. You're here. You've made it. Use that as a strength, not a weakness. Look at it as a strength, not a weakness. Look at it as a net positive that you made it. And now Chris, look at where you are,
I, based on what I've seen in you and other students, right? You weren't my student, but I get to see your podcasts and all the different wonderful things that you do. And I'm so proud for you. I'm just so proud for you. But it's because you are self-directed and you have skills and talents that are transferable to education. And I would posit that some of these skills that you learned through your Scientology experience are those that transferred to your education.
Yes. Let me actually speak to that for a second, because
I want you to talk about that.
This is important, because one of the things that ex-cult members or domestic abuse survivors, again, this is across the domains of coercive control, whether it's domestic violence, cults, gangs, whatever, right, trafficking. If you survive that stuff, you come out of that stuff, a common problem or complaint or issue that people think they have, and sometimes it's legit. I'm not saying it's never not a problem. It very much can be. But it can also be made into a problem when it's not, and that is, well, I don't have any skills. I don't know how to do anything. I don't have any job experience. I didn't, I don't have. Well, you weren't idle in the cult. I mean, that's the thing about cults, right? Is, I learned a tremendous number of skills as a cult member. And let me please share with you, beyond my own story, I know a man right now who just got out of Scientology very, very recently, and his skills that he had learned in computers and IT and in that realm, in organization, in management, in different things that this person had taken part in for many, many years, all transferred out. And when he sat down to write his resume, as I understand it from our talks, I said, write a skills resume, not a job history resume. Don't highlight who you worked for, highlight what you can do. Because you can write a resume or a CV that way. You don't have to do a chronological sequence of the jobs you held, and it's all the cult. I was raised in the cult,
and universities, colleges and universities have career centers, and they're very willing to help you with those things too, especially if you're a potential student. They'll help you assess some of those skills. So, something that I think is really important for people who have come out of any type of coercive control environment, relationship, situation, is that I believe there's resilience and persistence and determination. And those are, I don't know if they're qualities or behaviors. I guess they're a little bit of both that that are needed to earn a degree or complete a program, any kind of program, because you're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have, a day when you turn in a paper late, or, you have to, I always, my husband had to have his gallbladder out one time, things happen to people.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen to people. Students get sick. It's not the end of the world. It seems like it is. But if you persist and you say, I can come back from this, who are the people that can help me? Before you fall down that rabbit hole and say, oh, let somebody know what's going on.
That's right.
Immediately. Just say, hey, I'm having a bad situation. I'm sick, I'm hurt, whatever.
Something people might not be aware of, so let's highlight this, is at least in the system I was in the UK in Salford, they had what were called PMRs, I think it was, or PMCs or something. It was like personal mediating request or circumstance, something like that. It was basically an extension. Sure. It was, hey, I can't. I got
we have
sick.
What they call incompletes. We have incompletes in the US. And if a student is unwell or has a difficult personal circumstance and they've completed a certain amount of work, usually they can, depending upon where in the course it occurs, if they've completed maybe between 50 to 75% of the work, they may get some extra time. But you can't wait until after the fact. You have to be really proactive. You have to be ahead of things and not think, oh, well, I'll get it all caught up on the weekend, or when I feel better, I'll do this. So there are certainly different avenues that you can pursue so that you don't fall down and fail. They're like interventions, I would say. And I would like to get back to a couple of other things.
Oh yeah, please.
You had talked about the social support that you got from your classmates or your cohort. Those are really quite prevalent in education today. You're not alone. One of the institutions that I work with they all have Facebook pages. They all have their own Facebook pages, and some of them segment out into different groups based on their program area. Some of them have different interest areas like clubs or organizations or parent groups, whatnot. And most have office hours so that you can visit with your instructor online and just say, hey, I'm not getting it. Or what am I missing? Or am I on the right track? And students hesitate. They don't want to bother you. Well, please, you're not a bother.
Yes.
It's what I do. And I like to talk about learning, and I like to talk about what we're learning in our course. So, call me up. You won't be able to get me off the phone because, I'm interested in what's interesting to you in the course. So there are a lot of different ways that students can connect with other students. And I'm glad that you found that, Chris, and that you use that, because it's so important for people who are insecure for whatever reason or not fully confident to have a support system. And it's important to have a support system that's, made up of family and friends. But it's also important to have other people that are in the same situation that you're in, at least in school, because while your parents or your friends or even, work associates can kind of, cheer you on, they don't exactly know what your dilemma is with that particular statistics course, whereas the other people who are experiencing it, they know exactly what you're going through on some of those issues.
Big time. Truer words never spoken. That's very, very true. I definitely was supported By my family, by my wife, by friends I had who've been through university, right? I have very smart friends who way smarter than I am. And they were very supportive. But most of the time, to be completely honest, their suggestions as to, well, try this or do that, it weren't really applicable because the program that I was on was not what they had done, and it was at a different place, different time, etc. So it is helpful to have people to commiserate with, for sure, but there isn't really. It's not the same thing as when you have fellow students, or best, for me at least, in my experience, was my advisor who happened to be my professor. That's not always that way, and advisors can be amazing all by themselves. They don't have to be your professor in order to be amazing. But they're the people who actually know the nitty gritty nuts and bolts of the program and what you're exactly going through and what exactly the hurdles are you're trying to overcome, and whether those hurdles are self-imposed arbitrary nonsense that you're just inventing because you think this is necessary and it's not, or no, this is legit. Yeah, this is something you're really going to have to figure out, and let me help you do so. And I encountered both of those multiple times. And you need that help to sort of sort through that sometimes. And it's expected that you utilize those office hours, that you utilize those advisor times, that you jump in with both feet and sort of, maybe not, I'll say enthusiastically pursue your education, even if you don't have a smile on your face the whole time, right? I'm going to be really bluntly honest because I want people to know that this was not an easy thing to do. And there were multiple times in this year that I was doing this. Actually, I should say a year and a quarter, because I got extensions to get through it. There were times I was in tears. Absolutely losing my mind. I thought there were a couple of times where
that's when you should have reached out to me.
Well, I worked it out, but I'm just saying the level of frustration can be surprising.
It is.
And this is where I wanted to go with this, is I wanted to sort of take this up and then maybe wrap up our show for this time. But I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome, because this rears its ugly head in higher education all the time. And I don't know one person who didn't encounter it, or to even, bring it up or talk about it before or after the fact of it happening. And I certainly ran into it myself. So what's your understanding and experience of how that works?
Well, it's not really my area of expertise. I haven't done a lot of study in that. Okay. Excuse me. However, I myself experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
When I was getting my bachelor's degree, I'm like, okay, what else do I need to know? Did I miss something? Oh, I didn't learn this. It wasn't good. My program wasn't good enough. Excuse me.
Yeah, no worries.
So when I got to my master's program, I said to my professor, who was also my advisor, I said, is this statistics course going to be enough for me to pursue my doctorate? Because I'm not sure I'm learning everything I need to know to pursue my doctorate. And he was really highly insulted. He said, well, of course it is. And then, but I wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure. And then even, after I got my doctorate, I'm like, well, I have an EDD, which is a more practical application rather than a PhD, which is more about the philosophy of whatever it is. So I'm like, well, I don't have that PhD. And then I'm like, well, I don't have a PhD. I guess I need to go get that postdoc fellowship. So I pursued my postdoc fellowship. So, and I earned that. But I think for some of us, enough is never enough. And, some of us, we just want to know more, and we are not confident in the things that we know and that things that we have learned. And I think sometimes it takes a bit of reflection on your journey and where you have been and the milestones that you have achieved along the way, because I think it's very important to reflect on where you've been. And I think that can help someone who is feeling like a bit of an imposter. At least that's my experience with it. And students that I have in my courses, usually in the freshman course, the college success course, they're very afraid that they don't know enough to be there.
Right. Exactly.
And one of my first experiences with a student who had been in a cult, I was lecturing in a traditional classroom, and the third weekend she was physically ill and got up and left the course, and she came back and she said, "I'm sorry, I just had to leave." And I said, "That's okay. Do I need to get you some assistance? What can we do?" And she said, "I just didn't know what you were saying." And because her experience was not the things that I was saying didn't seem to relate to her experience. And so sometimes you can feel very lost in a course or in a program, and it's really that time to take a step back and reach out for help and have a conversation and find out where you had this little misstep and why do you feel like you don't belong here. Everybody belongs. And everybody deserves to get what they want and need out of life. But maybe you're not in the right program. Maybe that program's not for you. Maybe you need a different program. So I think that sometimes when people have that imposter syndrome, they feel like, they don't deserve it. I'm not sure, Chris, is that what you experienced, or how did it manifest in your experience?
Well, certainly the deserved thing could certainly come up for people. I could absolutely positively see how that rolls out. For me, it was more of the, on the intellectual side of the doubts and reservations and uncertainties and fears that I was experiencing in my own knowledge set. And, was I really up for this? Was this something that I could claim I actually knew anything about? Is this something that I was learning anything in? Am I getting anywhere? Should I even be here? How dare, and here's where it really manifested is, how dare I call myself an expert? Like what, what gall, what arrogance, right? That I would dare to claim such a title. And I started throwing that word around actually a little bit before I started my education. And so I was like, well, I know all this stuff. And I think the thing about it was two things. First thing was, somebody told me many years ago something that rang true then, and I still believe is true now, and that is that we fool ourselves. We kid ourselves. We have an inaccurate image or idea of ourselves because we are always kind of hyper aware of where we're at right now. What we know right now, how we think about things right now. And it's hard sometimes, really hard. Sometimes you really need a sudden reminder sometimes. You see a picture or somebody relates a story or to you about something you said or did 10 years ago.
Oh, sure.
And you're like, I did? What? It's almost like somebody's telling you about a stranger, because it's so different from how you see yourself now. But 10 years ago, that's how you saw yourself. That's how you acted. That's how you looked. And you forget. Time rolls forward. You change. You learn. You grow. You mature. Maybe sometimes we take some back steps. But however it happens, we are not the same person that we were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. That's perfectly normal. But because our self-image is always kind of in the present and is constantly being created, and we're sort of thinking more future than we are past most of the time, you forget all that. And so you kind of get this idea, I was always like this. And you were not.
It's convenient to forget some of that stuff.
Yes, it very much is, right? But we do ourselves a disservice, right? And of course, you know, there's only so much brain and there's only so many memories, and you only want to remember so much. And some of that stuff you would really rather forget. So it's understandable how this happens. It's not I'm not saying this is some flaw in us. I'm saying it's a thing that happens. And because it happens, we forget how much we've learned, how average we used to be maybe in something that we are now trained in or knowledgeable in or experienced in. And we don't give ourselves the credit for that forward motion or that growth.
And, you know, I said something earlier about reflection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Self-reflection. And I really think that it's very important for us in the learning process to reflect where we have been and what is it that we know now that we didn't, what perceptions have changed. So, you know, whether it's an 8-week course or a 10-week course, many of the courses I teach do have a reflection piece, and nobody likes to do them. I think because, you know, we have to look inward. And if people would look at those more like it is a tool to help you process where you've been and where you are now, you know, and where you intend to go. So I think that reflection is a great part of the process, especially as it does relate to imposter syndrome.
Yeah, big time, big time. I could not agree more. Another thing I would like to say about that in terms of countering or fighting your own imposter syndrome, right? Because it's really this feeling, we really didn't define it, but we're talking about when you think you don't deserve to be there. I shouldn't be here. This is beyond, I'm not up to this, or I don't know enough, or I'm faking it here, or this feeling you get. And I'm telling you, it's strong, it's powerful, and it can be quite debilitating even. In some cases, or if you really lay into yourself about it, right? And it's so. I have seen it with students. I really have. You're speaking the truth, Chris. And you know, a student will get past their first term, and they're like, "Okay, wow, I did it." But now everybody seems to know so much more than I do. They're so much more experienced. They have all of this. Well, they've got that same, you know, those same suitcases with all those self-doubts. They may be a little bit different in their wardrobe, but they're bringing them to class too. But I think it's very important to know that I think it is part of the process. Oh, absolutely it is. I don't think there's any way around it. And the reason I say that is I will fall back to the second point I wanted to make about this, which is this I'll relate it to Dunning-Kruger, right? This idea that, you know, the less you know about something, the more sure you can be that you know all about it. And, you know, that there is nobody who knows more than the beginner, right? And it's the experts who they come to realize through the course of the learning and the experience they get doing that, how little they know. But there's a big, huge difference between those two levels, is because the person who really doesn't know a whole lot won't let themselves think that way, right? They're all hepped up on the couple tidbits that they've got or the little bit of knowledge they've gotten. They think they know everything. And you come through that sort of arrogant puffery, and it's all about status and social groups. It all makes sense. It's not like it's some, you know, weird thing. People do it. But the more you learn, there's a very, very, and it's almost a line in the sand. I swear to God, I almost remember the day it happened. It's like the more knowledge you get, the more experience you get, the more accomplishments you accomplish. I mean, getting good grades, moving forward on these programs, you start getting this like confidence that comes from good works or from knowledge that you, wow, I really did know that.
Yeah, and the recognition, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The diploma on the wall.
Exactly, right? So you come through that, and there's a point. And I don't know that everybody else experiences it this way, but this is how I experienced it. There was this point where I went, wait a second. Look at all this I know. Look at all this stuff I've learned, all these years, all this work. I have a YouTube channel. I wrote a book. I got more books in me. I got all this stuff I want to tell people. Look at all this knowledge I have. Does the man on the street have this knowledge? Do the people who come out of cults have this knowledge? Do the people who even treat people who come out of cults, psychologists even, have this knowledge? No, they don't. They don't have any of it. I do.
Yeah,
and I know it. And I know it's true. And I know I'm right in this. I know from repeated instances of being right that I have confidence in what I know.
You have the experience with it.
That's right. And that's with the beginning of the end of the imposter syndrome, I think, because from there's a recognition of what you know, and a comfortableness with it. It's okay. This is what I know. But then right on the heels of that is, and look at how much more I have to learn. Look
Absolutely.
at all these, I've answered all these questions, and all they've done is present a whole array of new questions, things I don't yet know, and I want to find out. But you realize that all those questions are only possible because of where you've gotten to. And you would never have been able to ask those questions back when you were really a neophyte and all puffed up on what you thought you knew.
Yes.
Right? And so there's a huge gap there, and there's a sudden recognition and acknowledgement of that progress that was made. And for me, that was a game changer, because on that day, the expert thing suddenly made total sense. I am an expert in it, but that doesn't give me any rights to lord it over other people. It gives me the right to ask questions that I need to get answers to and find out. And use what I do know to try to help people as best I can. That's my mission, right? Other people use knowledge for other things, but knowing that and reading, it's a plateau, and it's like a place you go, yeah, I really can see farther in this field. I cannot say that same thing for quantum physics, or even, for sociology even, or for, engineering or something. I don't know anything about those things. I literally, I know, what I know would fill a thimble. I mean, compared to what the real experts in those fields know. And that was also part of the recognition of that, was I'm on my own plateau. You want to know about this stuff? You come to me. If I want to know about that stuff, I got to go to those guys. I can't just make stuff up and say it's true because I have a title. That's not how this works. And you learn that there are imposters out there, that there are people who fake it. And even some of them even have letters after their names.
Absolutely.
So you learn that that this is not a guaranteed result in everybody. And that I believe it takes that reflection. I think another word for it is humility. And I think that that's a really important part of the educational process, is a recognition of what you know in tandem with a recognition of what you still don't know, but are willing to find out. And that's to me, that's the cure for imposter syndrome.
And, I think that people who exit a cult and have gotten out of a cult or a bad relationship or whatever, and they're, we all know what we know. We all know our lived experience. We know that. And then when we go to get an education, no matter what it is, if it's, reading, or, if it's a self-education process or a formal education process, when we learn more about it in a more formalized setting, we learn concepts, processes, and theories that make those experiences more understandable. Oh,
Yes.
that's what that's called, or
Yep.
oh, that's what that process was. And I think that that's where that degree comes in, because now you have those underpinnings that relate to all those many years of experience and all the interviews that you've done and all of the different people that you've come in contact with and helped, whether it's, whether people see it on YouTube or not, because there are certainly many people that you've helped and influenced outside of this channel and some of the shows you've done too. So, I think that there's a lot of value in recognizing where you've been and where you are now. And why not look at where you're going? Why not look at what's going to happen tomorrow?
Big time. Big time. Exactly. And it really does help to get this education, because for me, actually, just building on what you just said there, is that's one of the key things that there's just so much catharsis possible. There's so much healing possible with knowledge, with the, and by that I mean really removing, destroying, if you will, the mysteries, the uncertainties, and the fears that we developed in those coercive environments, right, where we were purposefully subjugated or abused or traumatized for the benefit of somebody else. And the uncertainty, the gaslighting, the invalidation, and the you're nothing and you mean nothing, and your value is only as value, you only have as much value as the work you produce for this group, and those kind of sentiments that are, beaten into you, sometimes quite literally. You come out of that kind of thing and you are a ball of uncertainties and question marks and invalidations, right? And the reflexiveness, you do a lot of self-reflection, but it's always in the most negative possible interpretation. You are always the worst and the most horrible and the stupidest and, the clumsiest and the most idiotic. And what education gives you is it really can give you back parts of yourself by coming to a recognition that those things that were said and done to you were done in an effort to get you doubting yourself and your power, and purposefully cutting you off at the knees over and over again to condition you to do it to yourself. And once you learn about how those mechanisms work, you learn about trauma and trauma bonding and attachment and identity and what these things have to do with one another. These are powerful concepts because they can be utilized for the opposite. You can empower yourself with this knowledge, and you can regain your self-certainty in assurance and confidence in yourself that those people quite purposefully beat out of you, and that's there is no, that's priceless. There's how do you pay for that? How you can't. It's just, and it's so I want it so badly. I want those things for every person who's been treated that way, to realize that you didn't deserve it, you didn't ask for it, it wasn't necessary, and that there is a future that none of that has to exist in anymore.
That's right.
And that's what the education did for me, and that's why I push it so hard.
I think people can benefit from creating a new inner dialogue,
right?
And one that is positive and that puts those little voices aside that are always there, nipping at your heels.
Yep. That's right.
And something that I have found in most institutions, especially since COVID hit, a lot of institutions have groups and services to help people who have experienced trauma.
Yes.
Now, a lot of institutions have those as part of your tuition program. So again, there are resources that exist that people may not have even thought about using. And I really kind of push those services to students. I don't, I guess I create an awareness. I don't say, prescribe anything, but I certainly try to create an awareness that, use everything from the writing center to mental health to the career center to,
right.
whatever, you need. A lot of your educational institutions have them, and you should go ahead and, make the most of your experience.
Absolutely. And I will say I took advantage of all of it.
Great.
I did not get personal counseling. I did not feel I needed that level from my university, but it was there. Mm-hmm. It was there. It was an email away. The advisor talks were pretty much all the counseling I needed on that.
Yeah, I needed those myself.
Yeah, I needed that badly. Yeah. And my advisor professor was just Johnny on the spot with that. It was really perfect, and so patient with me. And my tirades. I would get so mad early on until I kind of got into how the program actually is supposed to go and what my role in it was.
I can only imagine because
I was fit to be tied sometimes.
Going back several years ago, I can remember some of the things that you said, and I'd say, I just so wish he would go get an education, then he'd understand more.
Yes.
And now you do.
Yeah, well, exactly.
And now you do.
But every video, every web page they had on the site about how to write papers, how to do all the mechanics of it, the do's and don'ts of being a student, what is plagiarism versus how do you talk to your fellow students without cribbing their ideas or they're cribbing yours, right? But yet you can still have dialogue, of course. And for a little while I was a little afraid to talk to anybody about anything because I was, and then it was like, okay, no, you learn, no, it's not that at all. And
right. It's a scholarly dialogue.
Well, exactly. And and that's a whole separate thing from commiserating over the difficulties of the program. You can do that. Right. It's okay, right?
Right.
And and overcoming all that stuff, I took full advantage of all those resources, as well as, I should say, I'll plug this here, is as part of getting through this process, there was no way I could have, had I not utilized great courses, Khan Academy, free resources that were available, on the internet that are right there, that can help you with some of fill in the blanks on stuff that maybe you don't know about or you need a refresher on. I got a book. I'm on the History of Psychology 101, right? And I read through the whole thing right at the get-go because I knew I wasn't doing that 4-year degree. So what did I not know?
Yeah.
Sure enough, it helped me a lot in giving me some background on the subject I was going into. And now having a, master's level education in it, I thought it was kind of important to understand what Freud was about and what conditioning is and, this kind of stuff. Right. And so, so you go back and fill in those blanks and it was incredibly helpful, but it was also very easy. It was easy to find. All I had to do was really look, and those resources were there for me in the university and outside online. So all of that is there for you guys too, and I want to highlight all of that as we wrap this up here. Did you have, did we bring up anything you wanted to say more about that I rolled right over the top of?
No, I think we had a very natural flow to our conversation. I think it emerged, as they say, organically. I think maybe some other time we could talk a little bit more about those transferable skills that people have.
Yes, great idea.
So we could, kind of delve into that. And I'm sure your listeners have, some questions about those things or some suggestions. So that might be an interesting chat.
Absolutely. Good point. And for you guys out there, if you're watching on YouTube or through my sensiblyspeaking.com website, leave a comment, leave a question, leave anything you're interested in about this topic or something that you think might be helpful for yourself or for others, because I look at all that and I'll be happy to incorporate that into our next talk. And I'm positive we can pull it off, Pat, sooner than a year from now.
I hope so. Hey, Chris, before we close, I want to ask you something very important.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do to celebrate your accomplishment?
Okay. Well, I didn't go to Disneyland.
Okay.
I did party. Definitely. Yes, definitely partied. I was pleasantly surprised to get some financial aid.
Good.
That was kind of fun, and from family and stuff. And
nice.
Yeah, definitely. And most importantly, for my state of mind after finishing, I actually gave myself a week off.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I stopped doing anything for a week. I just chilled. And that was the best part, to be honest.
Because it's important, after you go through a program like that, to recognize your accomplishment, which you did, and celebrate it with those you love. So I'm really happy to hear you did that, Chris.
Big time. Thank you. Thanks for asking. Well, Pat, I want to thank you for your time and your attention.
My pleasure.
Here. Yeah, you're this is just awesome stuff, and you're a great guest here. So thank you very much for being part of this.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Take care of yourself.
Awesome.
Keep learning.
Big time. And audience out there, thank you very much for sticking with us to the end here. Of course, as I always do, I will say, if you are enjoying the channel, thinking it's entertaining, informative, and educational, which I hope it is, then consider supporting the channel through Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, or other links. Well, I think those are the links below in the description section on YouTube. Thank you very much for coming around. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.